Chapter 1. The Awakening. The forest was alive, not in the way that people spoke of life, with hearts that beat and breath that flowed, but in a deeper, more ancient sense. The trees whispered secrets, the winds carried stories, and the earth pulsed with an energy older than any human civilization. And deep within this forest, a woman named Alara stood, her feet bare against the cold soil, feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath her. Alara had always been connected to the forest. Ever since she was a child, she had wandered its dense thickets, listened to its calls, and felt its power surging through her veins. But she had never understood the full extent of that connection until now. It had begun with a dream, a vision, vivid and overwhelming. In it, she saw towering trees stretch high into the sky, their branches intertwining like the fingers of ancient gods. She had heard a voice in the wind, soft yet commanding, calling her name. Alara, daughter of the forest, you are the chosen one. Rise and protect what is yours. When she awoke, the forest felt different. The air was charged with magic, and the wind seemed to carry messages meant only for her. She had felt a strange power stir within her, a force that pulsed through her blood, weaving through her very being. The next morning, Alara had gone to the heart of the forest, where the oldest tree stood. Its bark was thick and gnarled, its roots running deep into the earth. It was said that this tree was the spirit of the forest itself, the source of all the land's power. Alara placed her hands on the tree's bark, and the moment she did, a surge of energy flooded through her. The world around her blurred as a vision of the future flashed before her eyes, a future where her homeland was under threat, where invaders from distant lands came to plunder the forest and destroy its life. She saw men with axes, their faces twisted in greed, as they hacked down trees, stripping the land of its vitality. Then the voice returned, more urgent now. The time has come, Alara. Protect the forest, for it is your heritage. You are the forest's protector. The vision faded, and Alara stood before the tree, her breath coming in heavy gasps. The power within her was like nothing she had ever known. It was raw, untamed, but also filled with purpose. She had no choice now. The land needed her. Alara closed her eyes, focusing on the tree's energy. Slowly, she felt the ancient power flow through her, and with it came a sense of unity. She was no longer just a woman. She was part of the forest. She could feel the trees reaching out to her, the roots beneath her feet connecting to the very core of the earth. The leaves whispered in her ears, telling her their stories, and the wind seemed to speak in a language she now understood. The forest had chosen her, and now she would fight to protect it. As the days passed, Alara's newfound abilities grew stronger. She could command the trees, urging them to grow taller or shift their roots to block paths. She could communicate with the wind, calling it to carry messages or shield her from enemies. The earth itself seemed to respond to her touch, and she could summon the vines to entangle anyone who threatened the land. But the invaders were coming. She could feel their presence, their greed encroaching on the forest's borders. They were not just after wood or land. They were after the very heart of the forest. Alara could hear their war drums in the distance, their armies marching toward the sacred groves. Her people, the ones who lived at the edge of the forest, had always been in tune with the land. But they were not warriors. They were farmers, hunters, healers. It was up to her to protect them. And if that meant facing an army of invaders, then so be it. With the power of the forest coursing through her, Elara knew she would not face them alone. The trees would stand with her, the earth would rise in her defense, and the spirits of the forest would guide her hand. It was time to confront the invaders. The battle for the forest was about to begin. Chapter 2. The First Strike. Elara stood at the edge of the ancient forest, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sky above had turned a deep shade of crimson, signaling that the invaders were near. She could already feel the trembling of the land beneath her feet, as if the earth itself was aware of the coming threat. The trees, too, seemed to shudder in anticipation, their branches swaying restlessly in the wind. She had spent the past few days preparing, learning to harness the power of the forest that now flowed through her veins. She had called upon the trees, asking them to strengthen their roots and form barriers against the approaching invaders. She had communed with the wind, urging it to carry whispers of the enemy's movements. The forest was alive with magic, responding to her every command. But Elara knew that this was just the beginning. The invaders would not be stopped by mere barriers or whispers. They were determined to take what was theirs, and they would not hesitate to destroy anything in their path. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Elara felt the first tremors of their march. She turned toward the heart of the forest, where the ancient tree stood, its massive trunk towering above the others. She had come here many times in her life, but today it felt different. Today, the tree's power seemed to pulse with an urgency that matched her own. "Elara," the voice of the tree echoed in her mind, low and resonant. "The time is upon you. You must act now." She placed her hand on the tree's rough bark, feeling the warmth of its energy seep into her fingertips. "What must I do?" "The forest is your ally," the tree replied. "But it is not enough to rely on the trees alone. You must call upon the earth itself. The power lies beneath you, deep within the roots. It is there that your strength will be found." Elara closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation of the earth beneath her. She could feel the pulse of life deep within the soil, the ancient rhythms of the land. It was as if the earth itself was alive, waiting for her to awaken its power. She knelt down, her hands pressing against the ground. She felt the vibrations grow stronger as she connected with the earth. Slowly, the soil began to shift, and roots, thick and ancient, surged upward around her, wrapping around her arms and legs. The forest was responding to her call. "Elara," the tree's voice was steady, filled with wisdom. "You are the protector of this land. The earth will fight with you." With a surge of energy, Elara stood, the roots of the forest now entwining with her, her body pulsing with newfound strength. Her connection to the land was unbreakable. She could feel every leaf, every branch, every stone beneath her feet. She was one with the forest. Suddenly, the wind howled, carrying the faint sounds of battle in the distance. The invaders were drawing closer. Elara knew that this was the moment she had been preparing for. She turned toward the western border of the forest, where the first signs of the enemy had appeared. The trees were ready, their branches swaying in time with her heartbeat. She raised her arms, calling upon the wind to guide her. The earth beneath her feet trembled in response. A small group of invaders emerged from the tree line, their armor glinting in the fading light. They had come in search of resources, unaware of the force that now stood between them and the heart of the forest. Elara stepped forward, her feet light upon the ground. She raised one hand, and the trees responded. In a single motion, the branches of the nearest tree shot forward, ensnaring the invaders and lifting them off the ground. The men struggled against the grasping limbs, but the trees held fast. "Do not touch the forest," Ilara's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Leave now, and you will be spared. Come any closer, and you will face the wrath of the land." The invaders paused, confused and startled by the sudden show of power. The leader, a tall man with a cruel smile, stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Who do you think you are, woman?" he sneered. "This land belongs to no one but us. You cannot stop us." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. The wind began to pick up, swirling around her in a vortex. "This land is mine to protect," she said, her voice low but filled with authority. "And I will fight for it with everything I have." With a snap of her fingers, the ground beneath the invaders cracked open, sending them tumbling into a deep fissure. Roots shot up from the earth, binding their limbs, preventing them from escaping. The forest had spoken, and its will was clear. The leader struggled, but his efforts were in vain. "This isn't over, woman," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. "We'll return with 100 men, and this time you won't be so lucky." Ilara stood tall, watching the invaders as they struggled against the earth. The forest had delivered its first blow, but she knew it would take more than a single victory to protect her home. There were more invaders out there, and they would not stop until they had taken everything. The battle had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Heart of the Storm. The invaders were relentless, but Ilara knew the forest's strength was even greater. After the first skirmish, the enemy had retreated, but they would return. She felt it in the very air. Their hunger for the land, for the power that pulsed beneath the forest floor. They would not stop until they had claimed what they believed was theirs. Ilara spent the following days strengthening her bond with the earth and the trees. She needed to be ready for the inevitable clash. The forest had already proven its might, but she had to ensure that it would be enough to protect the heart of her homeland. She stood at the edge of the sacred grove, a place where the trees were ancient, their trunks gnarled with age. This was where the forest's power was strongest, where its magic flowed most freely. The wind whispered around her, carrying the songs of the trees and the secrets of the earth. "Ilara!" A familiar voice echoed in her mind, soft and calm, as though it had always been there. It was the voice of the ancient tree at the heart of the forest. "You are prepared, but the true test is yet to come. The invaders grow stronger, and their numbers increase. You will need more than just the strength of the forest." Ilara closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the rough bark of the ancient tree. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. "You have only begun to understand your power," the tree responded. "But there is another force within you, one that you have yet to fully awaken. The forest has chosen you not only to protect, but to guide. You are the balance between the earth and the sky. You must call upon the power of the storm." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The storm. She had never felt such a power within her, though she had always been aware of the wild storms that sometimes swept across the land. She had witnessed their fury, their destructive potential, but never had she imagined she could control such forces. "Storms are wild," she said softly, a hint of doubt creeping into her voice. "I have never known how to tame such power." "You do not tame it," the tree replied. "You learn to work with it. The storm is part of the earth, part of the sky. Just as you have learned to speak to the trees, so too can you learn to speak to the storm. It is a force that does not bend to anyone's will, but it can be guided. And you, Alara, are its guide." The wind began to pick up around her, swirling in a gentle vortex, as though responding to the tree's words. Alara closed her eyes and focused on the sensation of the wind moving through her, flowing around her like a living entity. She could feel its power, its wildness, but there was something else, something deep within her that resonated with it. A spark of understanding flickered inside her. She reached out with her mind, letting her senses extend to the wind. At first, it felt overwhelming, the rush of air, the energy of the storm. But then, slowly, she began to guide it, like a river flowing in a direction she chose. She could feel the storm brewing, its power rising in the distance. But now, it was no longer something she feared. It was something she could command. The sky began to darken as clouds gathered above, the distant rumble of thunder echoing in the air. Alara opened her eyes, her heart racing. The storm was responding to her call, and with it, the promise of power unlike anything she had ever known. She took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, her arms raised to the sky. "Come," she whispered to the storm. "Come and lend me your strength." In response, the wind howled, and the trees began to sway, their branches creaking as the storm grew closer. The first raindrops began to fall, followed by a sudden gust of wind that sent the leaves dancing through the air. Lightning flashed in the sky, illuminating the darkened world around her. The power of the storm surged through Alara's body, filling her with a sense of awe. She was no longer just a woman standing at the edge of the forest. She was part of something greater, something vast and untamable. She was the bridge between the earth and the sky, the protector of the land and its future. As the storm raged around her, Alara felt her strength multiply. She was no longer afraid of the invaders, for she knew that with the power of the storm and the forest at her side, there was nothing she could not face. And then, as if in response to her newfound power, a shadow loomed in the distance. The invaders were coming again, their war drums beating in time with the rising storm. But this time, Alara was ready. She could feel the storm gathering inside her, ready to unleash its fury upon anyone who dared threaten the land she loved. With a final cry to the storm, Alara turned toward the horizon. The battle would soon begin, but this time it would be different. She would not simply defend the forest. She would make the invaders understand the true power of the land they sought to destroy. The storm was on her side, and nothing could stand against it. Chapter 4. The Wrath of the Sky. The storm raged as Alara stood at the edge of the forest, her eyes locked on the advancing invaders. They marched steadily toward her homeland, their numbers growing with every passing moment. She could feel their presence like a dark cloud on the horizon, their ambition and greed stretching as far as the eye could see. But Alara no longer feared them. The storm had become a part of her, its raw power coursing through her veins, melding with the ancient strength of the forest. The trees whispered their support, their branches reaching high into the sky, and the earth beneath her feet thrummed with a quiet but powerful energy. The first flashes of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the darkened landscape. The wind howled, growing louder and more chaotic, as though it had become a living thing answering her call. The invaders faltered for a moment, surprised by the sudden change in the weather, but they quickly resumed their advance, believing the storm to be nothing more than an obstacle they could weather. They were wrong. Ilara raised her arms to the sky, her fingers spread wide, drawing upon the power of the storm. With a deep breath, she felt the energy surge within her, her body vibrating with the intensity of it. She focused on the invaders, watching them move closer. They had no idea what was coming. A deafening clap of thunder split the air, and the wind became a whirlwind of fury. Trees shook and groaned as the force of the storm built to a crescendo. The invaders stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide with fear as the sky above them darkened further, the clouds swirling in a violent vortex. The first bolt of lightning struck the ground near the enemy's ranks, sending a shockwave through the earth that rattled the invaders to their core. They scattered in panic, their armor clanking as they attempted to regroup, but the storm was unrelenting. Ilara felt the fury of the wind in her soul, her connection to the earth and the sky so strong now that she could control the very weather itself. With a single motion, she sent the storm crashing toward the enemy. The trees bent and twisted under the force of the wind, their branches lashing out like weapons. Roots erupted from the ground, wrapping around the invaders, pulling them to the earth with unyielding strength. The invaders struggled, their shouts lost in the chaos of the storm, but Ilara was not finished. She focused all her energy into the storm, calling upon the rain to pour down in torrents, turning the ground to mud beneath the invaders' feet. She could hear their cries of frustration as they slipped and fell, their once mighty march slowed to a crawl. "Leave now," Ilara commanded, her voice booming above the storm, "or face the full wrath of the land." But the invaders did not retreat. Their leader, the same man who had confronted her before, stepped forward, his face twisted with defiance. "You cannot stop us, woman," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "This land will be ours, no matter what it takes." Ilara's eyes blazed with fury. She felt the storm answer her call once again, its power surging within her, ready to be unleashed. Her connection to the earth deepened, and she could feel the ancient energy of the land guiding her hand. With a final cry, Ilara summoned the storm's full might. Lightning crashed down in a barrage of blinding light, striking the ground with such intensity that the earth itself seemed to shake. The trees bent and twisted, their trunks cracking under the pressure of the storm's fury. The invaders, caught in the full force of the tempest, were sent scattering in all directions. The wind howled like a creature in pain, ripping through the enemy's ranks, tearing their banners from their posts, and sending their weapons flying. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the rain fell in sheets, blinding them and slowing their every move. But the leader of the invaders would not back down. He stood tall, his sword raised high, and shouted above the storm, "This is not over, woman. We will return, and next time you will not be able to stop us." Ilara's gaze hardened. She could feel the storm beginning to subside, its fury spent for now, but she knew this battle was not yet finished. The invaders had retreated for the moment, but they would return. Their greed would drive them back, and when they did, Alara would be ready. The wind began to die down, and the storm slowly faded, leaving only the sound of distant thunder and the soft rustle of leaves. Alara stood alone at the edge of the forest, her heart still pounding with the aftermath of the battle. But even in the quiet, she knew the fight was far from over. The invaders had tasted the power of the forest and the storm, but they would not stop until they had taken what they wanted. Ilara had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. The storm had been a warning, a demonstration of the forest's might. And next time, the invaders would not be so lucky. Chapter 5. The Final Stand. The invaders had withdrawn, but their retreat was only temporary. Ilara knew they would not stay away for long. Every moment of peace she earned was only a brief respite, a chance to prepare for the inevitable return of those who sought to destroy the land she had sworn to protect. Days passed, and the calm after the storm settled over the forest. But Ilara could feel the tension building in the air. The invaders would return, and this time they would come with a force stronger than ever. The forest was not just a home. It was a living, breathing entity that thrived on the strength of its protector. Ilara had become the heartbeat of the forest, the link between the earth and the sky. But the challenge before her now was unlike any she had faced before. With the ancient tree's guidance, Ilara spent her days meditating deep within the sacred grove, attuning herself further to the forces that surged through her. The wind whispered secrets, the trees swayed with hidden messages, and the earth beneath her feet trembled with the anticipation of what was to come. The time for defensive tactics had passed. Ilara needed to become more than just the guardian of the forest. She needed to become its ultimate weapon. As she meditated, the ancient tree spoke to her once more. Its voice was calm, yet filled with urgency. The invaders are not just after the forest. They seek to destroy the very heart of this land, to sever the bond between the earth and the sky. They do not know the power they are challenging, but you, Ilara, are ready. Ilara stood, her mind clearer than ever. The storm had shown her the raw power of nature, but now it was time to channel that power into something more focused, more deliberate. She could not just defend the forest. She would take the battle to the invaders. They needed to see that the land was not theirs to claim. The forest would fight back, and so would she. That evening, as dusk settled over the horizon, Ilara felt a familiar stirring in the air. The invaders were returning. She could see their campfires in the distance, flickering against the darkening sky. They were preparing for another assault, this time more determined, their ranks bolstered with fresh soldiers and siege weapons. But Ilara was not afraid. This time, she would be the storm, not just the one who summoned it. As the night grew darker, Ilara made her way to the center of the forest, where the ancient tree stood tall. Its roots ran deep into the earth, and its branches stretched high into the sky. Ilara placed her hand on the rough bark, drawing from its strength, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her. The power of the earth flowed through her, and with it, a surge of confidence. She was ready. The storm, which had been dormant since their last battle, stirred again, this time at Ilara's command. She reached deep within herself and called upon the winds, feeling them rise in response. The earth began to rumble beneath her feet, and the trees around her seemed to awaken, their branches creaking and stretching toward the sky. The storm was not just a force of nature. It was now an extension of her will. The invaders marched toward the forest, their torches lighting the path ahead. But as they drew closer, the sky began to darken, the wind picking up once again, howling through the trees. The first flash of lightning split the sky, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The invaders halted, confused and uncertain. They had expected to face the forest's fury once more, but they were unprepared for what was about to come. Ilara stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes locked on the approaching enemy. With a single motion, she raised her arms to the sky, her voice rising in a powerful command. "This is the end," she called out, her words carried by the wind. "Leave this land, or face the wrath of the earth and sky." The storm answered her call, growing fiercer with each passing moment. The winds howled like a wild beast, snapping branches from the trees, and the sky erupted in a series of violent lightning strikes. The trees, rooted deep in the earth, began to move, their massive trunks twisting and rising, their roots spreading across the ground like living tendrils. The invaders were surrounded by a living wall of nature, the very land rising up to defend itself. The first of the enemy soldiers attempted to charge forward, but the ground beneath him cracked open, sending him tumbling into a fissure. Another soldier swung his sword, but the wind picked up, knocking him off his feet and sending his weapon flying. The storm raged, and the trees lashed out, their branches sweeping across the battlefield, knocking the invaders back. The earth itself seemed to rebel against the invaders, with roots and vines wrapping around their legs, holding them in place. The invaders were caught in the full force of the storm. Lightning struck with deadly accuracy, and the rain fell in torrents, turning the ground into a slippery bog. They tried to regroup, but the forest was unforgiving. Ilara could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they were no longer fighting a mere woman or a simple force of nature. They were facing the full power of the earth, the sky, and the very land they had hoped to conquer. With a final command, Ilara raised her arms one last time. The storm gathered one final, powerful burst of energy, sending a massive wave of wind and rain crashing over the invaders. The force was so great that it sent them scattering, their shields and weapons tossed aside by the wind, their soldiers fleeing in all directions. As the storm began to subside, Ilara stood victorious, her heart pounding with the energy of the battle. The invaders had been defeated, their forces scattered and broken. The forest had been protected, and the land was safe once more. But Ilara knew this peace would not last forever. There would always be those who sought to conquer, to destroy what they did not understand. But now, Ilara knew she had the strength to protect it, no matter the cost. She turned to the trees, her heart full of gratitude. The storm had passed, and with it, the final challenge. The forest was safe, for now. But as the wind whispered through the leaves, Ilara knew she was ready for whatever came next.